You might be the host now, Karen.
Well, okay, you can be the host. The host is
No,
with
it
the
does show
most.
you as a guest. That's kind of weird. I came in to start the meeting and it said, no, there's no start. There's a join. So I clicked on it. Boom, I'm here, and showed you already be here. But now up here, I do see where it shows me as host. So we're okay.
And when I came on, it said the thing was being recorded and I was the only one.
Yeah, it's set up to auto record.
Oh, okay. I thought, well, okay, go ahead and record me.
All right. Katie will be here in a minute. And actually, I'm going to step away to refill my glass. Oh, I know what. I want to stop the recording.
So I'm going to go ahead and call our meeting to order. All right. Thank you all for being here tonight. It's really good to see you. I'm sure we'll have a couple more people come on in. So first, we're going to start with the Pledge of Allegiance.
Sorry about that.
Thanks for the flag, Keith. All right. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. All right. So first, I'm going to let we've already had some of our guests introduce themselves. But if anybody else would like to introduce yourselves, and then we'll get on to our guest speakers for tonight. So if you'd like to just wave at us and tell us who you are, go ahead.
Hi, this is Carolyn Mundy.
Hi, Carolyn.
How are you? I'm here with my husband, David, and we also live in treetops. And so you know somebody else. And we're really happy to be here and to support the Democratic Party.
That is wonderful. Welcome, Carolyn. Treetop. What's happening over there in treetops? We got to get that everywhere. Wow.
Well, I'll say hello. I'm Susan, and I'm also from Treetops. And I think what we're discovering is that there are more of us here than we first thought there were. And we're all very happy to see that.
That is wonderful. Welcome, Susan. We're glad to have you.
Thank you.
I'm Ann. I'm also from Treetops, and I'm here with my husband, Scott. And it's nice to see that there's more Democrats finally speaking out here. And it's about time.
Well, hi, Ann. Welcome. And welcome to your husband as well. Well, it sounds like we've got several people who have several people on their Zooms. Yeah. So that's wonderful. This is so exciting. And well, before I go on, is there anybody else who would like to say hello? Okay, well, I guess I better introduce myself, huh? So I'm Katie, and I am the chair of our county party. And it's so good to have everybody here. And yeah, while I'm normally this like happy, bubbly person, I've been really frustrated lately with what things are happening. And I think that it's time for all of us to start coming out of the shadows, just like we're doing here in Treetops, which is wonderful, because there are a lot more of us than we know about. And it's time for all of us to come together, and we've got to fight for our kids, not just for their education, but for their safety while they get their education. So I'm very happy to have two of our candidates for State Superintendent of Education here tonight. And we're going to hear from them, and then we're going to talk about some voting information. And Keith, is Silverio on yet?
Not yet.
Okay, well, when he gets on, then we'll hear from him too. All right, so let's go in alphabetical order, just to be fair. How about that? So Dr. Burgess, would you like to go ahead and share?
Thank you all for having me tonight. As I was saying earlier to Katie, emailed her last night thinking the meeting was last night, but my schedule was open tonight to join you as well. I am Gary Burgess, of course, Superintendent of Education, candidate state of South Carolina. And I believe that all children are our children. And we must keep in mind this election cycle that American democracy is on the line. We're going to have to take public education away from the extreme right and recenter public education. Otherwise, our democracy is in trouble. If students are not educated well, they cannot give their consent to be governed. And I understand with my years in public education and working with people that the aim is to keep people ignorant, so that as was stated earlier by Karen, I believe those questions that are on the ballot that they seem to be innocent, but they're not really innocent type of questions. So my platform is ACE, academic excellence, community local control, and educator teacher pride. That kids should be educated through elementary school, 6th grade, as though they're going to our best universities and our best colleges in South Carolina. When they leave 6th grade, they should be able to choose whether or not they want to be an astrophysicist or whether or not they want to be an electrician. Not because we cripple them, but because we prepare them to be well educated and to be participating citizens in our society. I am the only candidate, period, that has a experience as a classroom teacher, district superintendent, as well as currently on an elected school board in Anderson County. I've done adjunct professor work at Converse University, as well as the Citadel. I am a fighter. I've had to fight for my own personal freedom and fight for the freedom of our students throughout South Carolina. I will not sit back and implement any law that abridges the right of the people to vote. You know, we sit here amidst 3 great American holidays: Memorial Day, where folk died for our right to vote; Juneteenth, that is coming up; and Independence Day, July 4th. My father was a World War II veteran. He went abroad to fight for a country where he did not have the right to vote. And now we have the right to vote, all American citizens. And we must understand that if our children are not educated, they will lose that particular right. So I'm running for them. We cannot allow the governor or the next state superintendent simply to disband boards. They want to get rid of boards that are elected by the people. A board member should only be taken off a board if they're incapacitated, can't serve, or if they've committed a felon, they've been convicted of a felon. Otherwise, the citizens should be able to vote in and vote out who they want on their school boards. Our school boards are not the issue. Our teachers are not the issue. Our communities are not the issue. We have bad laws, we have bad policies. No teacher should be threatened because they have to discipline a kid or call a kid down and raise their voice at a child. No teacher should have to face a lawsuit because they walk over to a young person, place their hand gentle on their shoulder and say, please sit down, calm down. That should not be a threat for our teachers. And we have to keep our teachers in the profession. There are several reasons why teachers leave the profession. Paying teachers well is an incentive, but teachers really leave the profession because of their workload. They feel overloaded. When I was principal of a middle school in Spartanburg County, I stopped teachers from turning in lesson plans because it was fictional for them to tell me on one Friday what they were doing the next Friday. But I did require to put an objective on the board. That turned that school around. Workload. The other thing we did was recruit parents who lined up to pick their kids up 2 hours ahead of time before school was out and train those parents or screen those parents to free teachers up of regular supervision of mundane tasks they had to do. The other reason why teachers leave the profession, young teachers, new teachers, is because they don't have great mentors, somebody that can help them through their first year. My first year teaching at Dorman High School in Spartanburg County, I thought I would not go back. At the end of that year, I assessed the situation and I found out I called 90% of my own issues. I changed that and the rest is history. Other reasons why teachers leave the profession is that they do not feel they have administrative support. Any principal that does not support teachers need to be replaced. That's just the bottom line. And the other reason why teachers leave the profession, personal reasons. I know a friend who had to leave teaching because she went through a nasty divorce and the school district, through this Department of Education, they're going to decertify her for a year. That's absolutely atrocious. And finally, when we talk about the teacher shortage, we also need to understand that there are artificial cut scores on tests such as the praxis that keep people out of teaching that would be great teachers. Simply because you're highly qualified to be a teacher as far as your credentials does not mean you'll be highly effective. I want highly effective individuals in the classroom. So I'm asking for those on this particular site for this meeting to vote for me during early voting or on June 14th, because a vote for me is a vote for your children, it's a vote for American democracy. And I will fight to make sure that we get what we need. The law states that the superintendent of education is secretary to the State Board of Education. However, the State Board of Education has no oversight of the state superintendent. He or she also promulgate or put into policy the laws passed by the General Assembly. And as I said earlier, I will not ever implement any law that I feel is unconstitutional. But more than that, the person who occupies this seat for the next 4 years has to be willing to speak up, take risks, and say, we're not going to do this. We're going to save our public schools and make sure we save American democracy. Again, thank you all for having me tonight. I'm excited to be on here with my colleague who's running as well with Lisa. Let's do what we have to do in order to preserve our democracy by preserving universal public education. Enough with the culture wars. Let's recenter public education and let's educate kids academically, artistically, athletically to make sure they're prepared for their future, which is really our future as well. That's Burgess for sceducation.org. Katie, thank you for having me tonight, and thank you all for listening.
Thank you so much,
Now,
Dr. Burgess.
I'll take any questions if there are questions, Katie. I'm not sure if that's the protocol or not.
Well, I was thinking we could go ahead and let Lisa present, and then we could open it up to questions for both of you. How does that sound?
Yes, that's not a problem.
Okay, does that work for you too, Lisa? All right. Well, then we're going to move on to Lisa Ellis, who is also a candidate for South Carolina Superintendent of Education. Thanks for being here, Lisa.
Thank you so much for having me. I am also grateful that it's a Zoom, so I haven't had to drive. My name is Lisa Ellis. I am also running for Superintendent of Education. I am a 21-year veteran school teacher. I've worked in Richland School District 1, Fairfield County Schools, and Richland School District 2. I'm currently the Director of Student Activities at Blythewood High School in Richland 2. And that's a hybrid role where I spend half of the day teaching leadership and service to high school students. And the other half of the day, I work with students planning and implementing school-wide projects. We just finished graduation. That was my sort of final big responsibility. So we graduated, I think, 433 seniors out into the real world. And it's always bittersweet to say goodbye, but to know that they're off to bigger and hopefully better things. And so, now we're getting ready for the new school year. 4 years ago, I started a closed Facebook group called SC for Ed, mainly because for those of you who don't know, teaching, even though you're surrounded by people all day, it's a very isolating profession because you're not with adults, you're with students anywhere from, of course, 4 years old all the way up to 18, really is a community. And that turned into a grassroots advocacy movement with the goal of placing a high quality teacher in every classroom in South Carolina. This is my first time and hopefully only time running for office. I just really have been disheartened and demoralized by the policies that have really made teaching a difficult profession, and just really so sad that my colleagues are choosing to leave the profession even though they don't want to leave the classroom. Today we had our farewell luncheon for teachers that are choosing not to remain, and it was heartbreaking. Every student in South Carolina deserves a high quality education. And the way that we get there is by placing high quality teachers in the classroom. And I know, unless you've been living under a huge boulder, about the teacher shortage. It's going to be worse this year. SC for Ed for the last 4 years has done a teacher vacancy report every summer. Right now, we did one right after contracts had to be signed in May And at that time, so that was about a week and a half ago, there are 3,700 teacher vacancies for next year, and which is what we predicted, that it was going to be worse. That is, of course, because of salary, but also because of working conditions. And the working conditions, you know, salary is always going to be a appropriations budget kind of question that we need to really continue to push. But working conditions are Department of Ed and local school districts. And so that's where I feel that if I was elected, I could make some immediate changes as superintendent of education to really look at what is working, what is unrealistic for teachers, and try and pull some of that off teachers' plates. I just really feel that we need to do better for our students. I've seen, like I said, firsthand in the classroom, how bad policy and bad mandates affect not only teacher working conditions, but morale. And while a lot of these problems are societal problems that we're dealing with, they always end up at the schoolhouse. And so I just really am trying to make things better for students and teachers in South Carolina.
Thank you. Thank you. Well, do we have any questions for our candidates?
Lisa, I didn't understand what you were saying. Your advocacy group is what?
We're SC for Ed. So South Carolina SC for Ed. And it, like I said, it started as a closed Facebook group 4 years ago. It's grown, the Facebook group itself has grown to over 33,000 members. And then we've done lots of sort of advocacy work. Really, the goal is to teach teachers how to advocate for themselves. And so we've done a lot of teaching in that sense. One of the things that we really try and push is it's so important who teachers vote for, in terms of, you know, really looking at their livelihood depends on elected officials all the way from governor down to school board. And so, you know, we really push the paying attention to who you're voting for, what policy is being brought up. And this past legislative session saw some really terrible policy that was the focus instead of what should have been the focus.
And would you spell that? SC?
SCFORED. Here, I can put it in the chat.
Okay. Okay, thank you. That's what I wasn't quite understanding. SC for Ed. Got it. Thanks.
All right, what other questions are there? Oh, sorry, Lisa?
Yes, and there's a Lisa running, so that's kind of interesting. I was getting confused. I'm like, wait, I'm supposed to speak? I didn't know I was supposed to speak. Scared me for a second. I wondered if one or both of you could just briefly explain what you think the primary focus of this role is.
Lisa, you want to go first, or I can go first?
Yeah, I'll go first. That's fine. I think that the primary role of the superintendent of education is to protect the institution that is public education. You know, when you look at the numbers, public education in South Carolina educates almost 800,000 children. And, you know, I fully consider public education to be a right in our society, for it to be you know, it's one of the pillars of an educated society, and we need to be teaching students how to think critically, you know, and those sort of things. And so I think the superintendent of education is that sort of first person that is doing whatever she or he can to protect that institution and meet the needs of the stakeholders, which are our students. So that, to me, is you're always, the superintendent of education should always be asking the question, how is this in the best interest of our students?
As well, I know that the primary role of the state superintendent is to be the chief advocate for public education. And that person needs to speak up and speak out loudly to let the public know what's going on in our public schools. And that has not been happening over the last several years. That person must be willing to take risk. We have too many folk now in office who are more concerned about what appears to be appropriate, appears to be legal, than what appears to be right. And I believe that right makes might, and that the person who occupies that position has to be a fighter for universal public education. We cannot make excuses because of where students live, their zip code, their ethnic or racial background, their sexual orientation. That is not why we are in school. We're in school to teach kids, and we have to make sure that every kid is taught well. So yes, there are legal requirements in the state constitution for the role of the superintendent of public education. That's fine and dandy, but the person has to be somebody who's willing to take risk and speak up about what's going on in our public schools. That person has to say, enough with excuses. We're going to educate every child and educate every child well. There's no reason why we're number 43, other than that we don't want to educate all the kids. We make excuses for why we can't educate kids. That is ludicrous. We have those kids more than their parents have them. And when those kids come to our schools, we become a locus parentis, and we need to demand that the schools and that we are supported in teaching and making sure all kids are educated. Great question. I appreciate it.
Miss Ellis and Dr. Burgess, there's a question in the chat from Susan. It says, I taught in New York and standardized tests drove the structure of the curriculum instead of allowing teachers to apply a broader sense of teaching. How are standardized tests used in South Carolina?
Go ahead, Lisa. Go ahead, Lisa. I'm sorry.
They're a nightmare. They are used too much. One of the things that it leads to poor working conditions for teachers is the emphasis on what we call high stakes testing. And that's the one day, all the marbles rest on this one assessment. Those assessments have been proven to be racially biased, gender biased, experience biased. And so that's something that teachers, that's one of the reasons that teachers are leaving. We have pushed for several years now for the only testing to be what is federally mandated. And the offshoot of that is because of the way that our school report card in South Carolina is measured, you have the bulk of it being weighted on those standardized tests, which isn't a good reflection of whether students are learning and growing. The double impact on that is because it affects the school report card, districts add on more assessments to determine where kids are going to be for that state assessment. So you've got the preparing for the test and what we call the fake testing, the benchmarks, those sort of things. And so really by the time you get to the actual test, the kids are burned out, the teachers are burned out, and we just don't have very good success of determining what students have learned and how they grow. One of the things and that's one of the issues that I would push in terms of Department of Ed is really trying to, and you can't use the word force, but really trying to get districts to back off of those fake tests, those benchmarks, because the reality is you've got to trust the teacher, and any teacher who is worth their weight in gold knows where their students are and knows who is being successful and who is not being successful. And yet we've taken that trust out of the teacher's hands and forced them into often a very prescriptive curriculum, which really is not in the best interest of the students, nor does it allow the teachers the creativity to meet the needs of the diverse students that we teach. And so I just really hope that that's something that, I have the opportunity to take on and really try to get that high stakes testing either eliminated or minimized. But that's going to really need to be worked on through our school report card.
As well, standardized tests as such indicate that they're standardized human beings. Human beings cannot be standardized. We need to give formative assessments to see where children are. But I want to tell you a personal story. I was a student at Wofford College, and I was in their ed program. I was the only African-American student in their ed program the year the NAACP sued the National Testing Service. I was not a very good test taker. However, when I was getting ready to go take the NT at that time, not the praxis, I went to Spartanburg High School. What I did not know, because I'm a first generation college student, I wasn't really into statistics, but I did not know that 100% of Wofford's Black students would either pass the NTE or fail the NTE. That was me. So I go and take the test at Spartanburg High School. When I left the testing site, I thought, that's interesting. I think I did very well on this test. I get back to Wofford and talk to Dr. Prince, who was the chair of the education department. He said, Gary, how do you think you did on that test? That year, they put Black history on the test. It just so happened that I wasn't rich enough to go to Africa, Europe for the entrance, so I took a Black history test class. I always tell folks, all the Black history I know, I learned from a white man at Wofford, but Black history was on that test that particular year. And I did well in that section, every other section. But my point being, Wofford gave me a great liberal arts education. I would not have passed that test had I not been properly educated. I was not prepped for the test, but my entire educational experience at Wofford allowed me to pass the NTE. I said that to say this. We need to get rid of standardized tests as such, only those that we can use to inform instruction. But we have to make sure that every kid can read, write, do arithmetic. So if they're given any test, that they will pass. We need to let teachers do their jobs. All these assessments are unnecessary. But there's a saying out there, Susan, that if it's not tested, it's not taught. That's ridiculous. My son is a musician, a very accomplished musician. I went to the government school in Greenville, attended UNCG, graduated with a master's from the University of Cincinnati. Now he's teaching in Mass and is getting ready to go into a doctoral program. But he knows, and I know, that a child who does well in music is an excellent, well-rounded academician that can pass any test. So we have to make sure that every child is given a great education. Don't tell me, well, these are Title I kids, which I would have been when I was growing up, and they may not be able to learn like other kids. But that's not true. We have to make sure that when kids come to our classroom, that we expect the very best of each of them and give them the scaffolding, the support they need in order to do and be successful. Going back to the questions, standardized tests as such do not inform instruction, because we get those test scores back well after teachers have done their planning for the year. And I agree with Lisa on this, is that if it's not going to inform instruction, those tests need to be gotten rid of. And that's why I say that the superintendent of education must be the chief spokesman for schools. I have not heard any superintendent say publicly, call a press conference and say, we're having too many tests. These tests are unnecessary. They need to be cut out. I've not heard that, period. And the person has to be able to say that. I don't care if it's mandated by the state or mandated by the federal government. It must be said, and we must rally teachers and the communities around us to stop this foolishness. Thank you. I hope I answered your question, Susan.
Thank you both. Are there any more questions? Keith, go ahead. We can't hear you, Keith. All right, Keith, while you figure that out, I've got a question. Dr. Burgess and Miss Ellis. So I taught elementary school, and the last few years that I taught, it was combined. It was kindergarten through 8th grade. And one of the things I noticed was that the elementary school teachers had significantly less planning time than the middle school teachers. Is there anything, do you have any ideas on how to fix that? Because we, from talking to the middle school teachers, we would piece together, it seems like we had a lot more subjects to plan and a lot less time to do it. Just wanted to see what you think about that.
I'm a Southerner. I was going to let Lisa go first.
Well, I've gone first the last 2 times. I don't mind to continue to go. I was going to give you that opportunity.
Lisa, I'll go first then. Number one, as I said in my opening, is that there are parents out there, and Kate, if you taught at elementary school, I'm not sure what you thought. I didn't realize that parents line up 2 hours ahead of time to pick their kids up. We have great parents that we could train, not spend a lot of money to have them come into the classroom in the schools and free teachers up of supervision and other things that would give teachers more time to teach. I also know in elementary school that oftentimes you guys teach in clusters and teams, and the team should be able to come up with innovative ways in order to make sure you get proper planning. 30 minutes is great. That's ridiculous as well. You should have at least 50 minutes an hour of planning in the school. And there's no reason we can't do that. Again, and I say this in all sincerity, my years in education, my work at D.R. Hill Middle School, Dorno High School, Pillington High School, superintendent schools, what I found is that we have antiquated rules in place that we need to get rid of and let teachers do their jobs and organize themselves in such a way that they will have adequate planning, that they will have adequate things to do. Here's another great story. When I was principal at D.R. Hill Middle School, I had planned, along with my counselors, a advisory period. I mean, we had worked all summer for this advisory. And a teacher came in, won't call her name, who was very brave, to my office. We had a great relationship. And she looked at me and said, Dr. Burgess, that schedule will not work. Now, I knew the schedule would work. However, I'm dependent upon them to implement it, correct? So if they say it won't work, it won't work. So I said to her, you need to go back with your teacher friends and you all devise a schedule. We're 2 days from school open. And if you bring the schedule to my office and tell me it will work, we'll implement that schedule. Guess what we did? We implemented that schedule. That's at D.R. Hill Middle School. And that school went from the lowest of the low in math and English to a national blue school, Pamela's finest school, exemplary writing school, because I worked with teachers, we worked with parents. They were very active in what was going on in the school. So what I say, Katie, since you were a teacher, you know right now what could be done in order to free teachers up, but no one's listening. No one's listening because we have this idea that somebody on top knows best for everybody, and that's simply not true. We need principals and other folk in schools that will allow teachers to do what they do. You guys are professionals. You perfect your craft, and I believe in teachers, period. Hope I answered your question, Katie.
Katie, I think that that's a great question. And I will tell you, my hat's off to elementary school teachers. I lasted 2 days as a substitute teacher for a first grade classroom. And that was enough for me to realize that I needed to go to high school where they could at least take care of their bodily functions without me having to be there and tie shoes and hand Kleenexes out and all of that. One of the, I guess probably the only thing that the legislature did this year that we could call a win was the 30 minutes daily planning for elementary and middle school teachers. I say that in frustration because that really shouldn't be a state law. That should have been something that when we started talking about this and here, because as a high school teacher, we're on a sort of modified block. So I get 90 minutes of planning a day. So and high school is very different than elementary school, but that time is crucial. And so when we started hearing as part of SC for Ed that elementary school teachers weren't getting any planning, much less any break to handle their own, needs, I was flabbergasted. And so we started calling attention to that immediately with SC for Ed. And that's something, when I talk about working conditions being specific really to schools and to districts, that's something that districts should have handled immediately, because there's ways that you can give teachers planning time. I think part of the problem probably over the last 10 years has been not only the shortage of teachers, but the shortage of school support staff. But that's one of the things where those places that have that local control really should have been figuring out ways to make that happen. And 30 minutes is not enough. Like when you think about an elementary school teacher, who drops their kids off at related arts, because that's usually when you got your planning. And if you needed to, use the restroom, or if that was the time that you had to gobble down your lunch, because during the actual lunch period, you were too busy to opening all your students' lunches, cleaning up spills, all that. But if you have to make copies, if you have to make phone calls, that 30 minutes is eaten up, just immediately, which doesn't even take into account, planning effective lessons, grading, those sort of things. And so, I can't say that I've seen it firsthand in elementary school, except for those 2 days that I substituted. But I've heard enough to where that is one of the things that just makes working conditions so difficult for elementary school teachers. And frankly, there's days when you just need that planning time just to sit back and take a breath and close your eyes and just meditate, right? I mean, just because it depends on the day. I think that that's something that the superintendent needs to really push for more time. When we look at countries that have really successful school systems, their planning is either double or often more than their teaching time. And that's really how you support teachers, is by giving them that time to do what they need to do. And again, that trust to say, we know that you're going to do what's in the best interest of our students. But that's one thing that now is in state law for at least 30 minutes. I'm curious to see how districts interpret that law. I don't have full faith that all districts will do right by their teachers, but that is because of what we hear from all over the state and how teachers are being treated.
Thank you both for all your answers. Carrie, did you have a question? Go ahead.
Yeah, I did. First, I apologize for being late. I was working on the Rules Committee. I'm a firm believer in a holistic approach to education as a product of the New York City public schools, and having seen the California public schools for my own kids, I know what a good public school system is, and we need it here in South Carolina. The fact that we are number 48th with only Arkansas and Mississippi under us is disgraceful. There are 1,500 Gold Star high schools in the United States. There are 3 in South Carolina. All right? There is not an integrated program to assure that when a kid shows up at school, he's had a breakfast. There's a lot that you have to do, and it all takes money. How are you going to get it?
Well, I'll go ahead and speak to that.
I want him,
Carrie,
excuse me, I want the doctor to respond.
Thank you for
okay.
that question. It all takes money. The first thing I'm going to do as state superintendent of education is ask for a comprehensive forensic financial audit to see where money is going. I believe we have the money not only to increase teacher pay, but also to do wraparound services in the state. I will work with, I will speak up, I will do what needs to be done in order to coerce or persuade the General Assembly to give more money where money is needed. We need to look at as well Act 388, where we got rid of property taxes for the operation of schools. And there is a study out there that says you have to have a 3-legged stool when it comes to taxation, to have stable taxation and stable revenue for schools. That's income tax, property tax, and sales tax. Sales taxes, of course, are volatile. They're up and they're down. I have been in a seminar with Derek Black, professor of law at USC, and this is an interesting book that everyone on this chat needs to read. It's called Schoolhouse Burning. And what he indicates is there's been historically a move in South Carolina not to really educate all the children, from separate but equal, even until the day where schools are physically desegregated. But when children walk through the schoolhouse door, they segregate again based upon academic program. And until we get serious about educating every kid in the state, we're going to be 43. We're going to be 48. We're going to be 49. We're going to be 50th. We must educate and be serious about that. And the superintendent of education must be the one who speaks up for every child in the state. Enough with excuses, enough with saying we cannot educate the kids or they're not getting enough resources on the 9 to 5 corridor. That is true, but that's true because of the history of the state and the history of these United States of America. You know, I'm a proud American, as I tell folks, American by birth, but Southern by the grace of God. I believe in my homeland. It's the South, and we can do better in South Carolina, and we must do better in South Carolina. So that's how you get the money. You got to speak up. Again, I'm not saying the superintendent of education speak up. I'm not saying any of them speak up and say we need to educate all kids. What they have done when I was principal, they were saying we got to give choice, because if you don't give school choice, then they're going to want to take money to private schools. Now we have a situation where we're giving vouchers to poor kids to go to private schools, and that's not going to work. $5,000 seems like a lot of money to poor kid, to a poor family, but it's simply not going to work. Why cannot every kid get a great education where they are in their zip code, with doing what we have to do to educate kids? That's what we have to do. And that's how you get the money. You have to put public pressure on these people. Yes, we've had protests, we've had other things, but those things have not worked. Teachers only get a raise. This 30-minute time for all teachers is ludicrous. They should have an hour to plan in elementary school. The people who need to be the protesters for teachers, the single person needs to be the state superintendent of education. We need to allow teachers to be in their classrooms to teach. When teachers are not in classrooms, when schools are closed down, you all know the stats. The crime rate goes up, the pregnancy rate goes up, and kids who are poor are hungry. But the superintendent of education needs to be the person that speaks up on behalf of universal public education. You get the money by putting pressure on people, by educating the public, by making sure that the public knows what's going on. And the public does not know what's going on because they believe that we're just wasting money in public education. If that is true, it's because the money is not getting to the classroom or to the classroom teacher. Great question. I appreciate that, Gary.
You're welcome. Lisa?
Miss Ellis, I'm going to give you a chance to answer that question as well.
Sure, thank you. I think, currently this school year, public schools are being underfunded $700 per child. And that's based on the state's own law of how we fund. And so when you think about how much money and how much that could help, particularly teaching the whole child, as we've seen as I've seen with COVID, the students, we all heard about the academic loss, which is this nebulous criteria. What we witnessed when students came back this school year was the mental health piece and the social piece that was really the big concern for teachers, was that how the students were mentally and how they were emotionally and socially. And that's what we really realized was lost during the pandemic, and what we needed to focus on. In my opinion, the superintendent, has to be vocal, has to be transparent in terms of all of that. But, and I know I'm preaching the choir when I say this, we have to vote people into office who care about public education. And I think that's one of the problems that we've had in South Carolina is that we've had a Republican controlled General Assembly and governor seat for 20 plus years. And so, you know, I would love to say that as superintendent of education, you know, I'm going to fully fund education. I've been begging for that for 4 years now, but that's ultimately up to the General Assembly, and the public has to start paying attention to who they're voting into office and what their priorities are. You know, that, and like I said, I'm preaching to the choir on this one. But that's something that we really have to prioritize public education, and everybody has to do it regardless of whether you have a child in school or not, because again, it's that pillar of society. When I go to Target, I want to know that the people that are working there are, you know, are good workers and are going to take care of me as a customer. You know, most of them are going to be your public school graduates. When I drive over bridges in South Carolina, I want to know that those are the best engineers on the job, and more than likely they're public school graduates when you just look at the sheer numbers. And so we've got to look at education differently. We've got to look at it as a priority, and we've got to vote people into office that are going to focus on that. You have a, you know, gubernatorial race where there are very different opinions on what education in South Carolina should look like. And we've got to make sure that when people go vote, that they're putting education as a priority. You know, other than that, as superintendent of education, I think that we've got to realign our budget with 21st century needs. One of the aspects that I'm amazed at is that we still spend so much money on traditional textbooks. We're in 2022 where kids have, if they don't have their own personal computing device from their school, they've all got a smartphone that you can look up anything. And so to me, there's definitely ways that we can reallocate the funding that's already there. But at the end of the day, we need more funding. When you compare what private schools are charging, you know, it's for a quality education, it's nowhere near what public schools are getting for the children there. I hope that answered your question.
Well, not quite. I mean, I understand that the segregation academies are very well funded, right? I also understand that our opponents in the opposite party use grievance and racial animosity as a very strong tool to keep the general population under control. The issue here for the superintendent of education is not necessarily establishing curriculum or criteria. The biggest issue I see is we need to have a very, very strong voice, not only in the legislature, but in the entire media. People just do not understand. I talk about the corridor of shame down in Orangeburg. They look at me like I'm nuts. I attend some of the rural caucus meetings. And one of the things as well as education, and one of the things I notice is that there is a uniformity of need, not only in education, but for seniors, for you name it, regarding broadband. Now you're talking about advanced technology. You cannot use advanced technology in a school that is 30 miles from the nearest broadband repeater. So these are the issues as I see them, and they are so complex. You can't just zero in and say, oh, we're going to do this and we're going to do that. It's education of the population that I wanted to hear. Okay? So thank you. And Doctor, thank you.
Great. Keith, do you want to try your question again?
Okay, can you hear me yet?
Yes, there we go.
Thank you. Well, I'd like to reassure both these candidates that when you talk about needing support in the General Assembly, you're also addressing two of us that are running for office to replace the people that keep trying to derail education into the cultural wars instead of focusing on the 3 R's and the rest that goes with it. Katie's running for House District 44, the north part of this county. I'm running for House District 45, that runs from the neck of the Panhandle all the way through this west side of Lancaster County and a little bit into Kershaw. We have extremely strong education planks. We're very anti-vouchers. We are very pro increasing, taking care of our teachers. Katie is extremely well equipped at dealing with those quality of work issues. And I know that just common sense is we need more assistance to the teachers in the classrooms. I've read where, because of funding cuts and all, and the fact that our current General Assembly seems to take well, if things are getting a little tight, we're going to cut education first. Oh, well, now things are doing well, we're going to fund education last. And we definitely plan to make changes of that. What other ways can the candidates, and we have some really great Democratic candidates across the state running for House, and what are some of the other particular things that we could address that would support our educational system statewide? Thank you.
Keith,
I'm gonna go ahead, Dr. Burgess.
okay, Keith, thank you for that question. I know this. The superintendent of education has to be the one who speaks up and speaks out forthrightly about what is going on in our public school system. My first 4 years in the public school system, I attended Bethune High School. It was a segregated school in Inman, South Carolina. And there I learned to read, to write, and do arithmetic. And when we desegregated the schools in Inman, I was ready to compete with anybody, anywhere in my grade level. The superintendent of education must not make excuses for why children are not learning. He must not, or she must not make excuses for why we're being underfunded. That person, excuse my expression, must raise a little hell and even go to jail if they have to, because otherwise nothing's going to happen. Yes, what you guys are doing, Katie, you, Keith, is going to be extremely, extremely important. But this constitutional office, statewide office, that office holder must be willing to speak truth to power. My son is an educator. I asked him once, Lee, do y'all ever discuss what is called in local parentis? He just looked at me. I said, well, that means that you're the parent substitute when that child is dropped off at school, and you have an obligation to educate that child. Again, I understand perfectly what is being said, why we've been underfunded is because, as I began my statement earlier, democracy is on the line. Finally, I'll end with this. The Northwest ordinances that predated the Constitution required, as you go in the Northwest, that a public school be in every one of those townships. That's why public education is not mentioned in the United States Constitution, because it was assumed that public education was the pillar for democracy. Our founding fathers understood that if a citizen is not educated, they cannot participate in democracy. Look where we are now with the far right. Look where we are now with folk not understanding what democracy is all about. We're in a very, very dangerous place. Look at what happened in Uvalde, Texas. And I have this program I call SAFE, Sensible, Actionable Firearm Education, not for the schools to do, but for communities to come together in a house of houses of faith. We have an issue with folk who don't understand that we live in a multiracial, multi-ethnic country. And if we don't save public education, we're in trouble. So going back to your question, Keith, and I'm so excited that you and Katie are running, and that you're strong advocates for public education. You must demand that a superintendent of education speak up and stand up and do what needs to be done. That's the only way we're going to save public education. It has to be an effort by the state superintendent of education to educate the public. The public does not know what is going on in our public schools. We don't need vouchers. We don't need schools that are not educating the entire public. We have great public schools in the upstate and the Midlands and the PD and the coastal regions, and we need to replicate those schools that are providing a great education for everybody, and not just for one segment of the student body that comes in. I hope I've answered your question, Keith.
Miss Ellis, would you like to answer that as well?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. And I too am super excited that both of y'all are running and wish you all the best in
Exactly.
the campaign. I think that, you know, if I was elected superintendent of education, I am not a politician. Like I said, I am there to do what is in the best interest of children. And I will make sure that people know, you know, the reasons behind it. I think as candidates, that where y'all can be helpful in this situation is recognizing, like I said earlier, that the problems that we have in school are societal problems. If you look at the school safety issue, which is in everybody's mind right now, you know, I have been asked the question, well, what do we need to do? And that's a really complex problem, but it can't just fall on the schools to fix. And so that's where I think, you know, candidates pushing for, you know, help with gun control. And I know that, you know, that tends to be a taboo situation in elections, but there's definitely those are societal problems that if we take a stand and say, no, this is, again, not in the best interest of our citizens. No citizen needs access to a high-powered, you know, I don't even know the names, but evidently it's not assault rifle anymore. But no citizen needs access to that, right? Or if they have one, they don't need access to bullets, you know, those sort of things. Or if we're talking about the fact that, you know, a third of our children and higher right now because of COVID live in poverty. You know, those are social programs that we need to be pushing. You know, that's one of the things that when the school buildings closed, schools didn't shut down. We were still working, but then when the school buildings closed, the biggest concern for teachers and principals was that a good chunk of our students get both breakfast and lunch from schools. And we were concerned about how they were going to be fed. Again, that's a societal problem. To go back to speak to Mr. Kimmel's comment about broadband, you know, that was one of the flaws that we saw in virtual learning, was that kids in rural areas and parents and employees for that matter didn't have access to high-speed internet. And with the money that South Carolina received, not only from, you know, CARES and that COVID money, and then also the last 2 years of the budget surplus, that should have been a top priority for the state to expand that high-speed internet access, not only for schools, but to make us competitive with the business world, right? Because if you have access to high speed, it really doesn't matter where you work. But we didn't see that. And so I think, you know, in my opinion, if you can translate those issues and say, you know, here's how it affects the everyday South Carolinian, then I think people might say, oh, you know, maybe, and then therefore by extension, you then help improve the public education system. Does that make sense?
Yes, thank you very much. That's a great answer as well.
Oh, Gina? Gina, you're on mute. And Gina, while you're unmuting, I just want to mention, I think this is going to be our last question, and then we're going to move on to the rest of our meeting. So Gina, go ahead.
We've had a lot of thoughtful questions. I am a former teacher as well, and I taught regular ed as well as special ed. so this question pertains to special ed. I know that a lot of the right are now looking at ending our federal Department of Education. And that is a lot of where our support for special education comes from. And I know we have the federal law for IDEA, but where if they do come through and end the federal Department of Education, what do you two plan to do with special education and how you will support special education in the state? And even if they don't, where do you see special education going in the state? But especially if they do in the federal Department of Education.
Gina, that's an excellent question. One is that we need to make sure that our special educators have the support that they need in educating children. Two, going back to the question from Keith, they can support the superintendent of education by really looking at the taxing system in the state, getting rid of Act 388, of pushing for that act to be done away with, so we can get more monies into the schools to operate schools. We should not be underfunding schools by underfunding students. So going back to your question, we must be strong advocates for public education, but for special ed as well. The other thing we need to do is stop misidentifying students. We're putting a lot of students in special ed who are simply maladjusted. We're putting students in special ed who may be incorrigible, but they're not special needs students. So if the Department of Education has gotten rid of, which I don't think that's going to happen, I think that's just a political talking point for the far right, because they don't want anything federal unless it's Social Security, unless it's other stuff that benefits them. We simply need to make sure that we're advocating for special needs students or exceptional students so that they will get what they need, because that spectrum of special ed, as you know, Ben, a special ed teacher, is a vast spectrum that I consider gifted and talented to be exceptional kids as well. So all that plays into it. But to directly answer your question, we just have to provide more support for teachers who are in special needs classrooms, period, bar none. And we need to stop this foolishness about not taking federal money. I hear my Republican friends say, we need to get rid of the Department of Ed because we want this, that, and the other. But yet they then propose to do the same thing at the state level, simply because they don't want the federal government involved in telling them, no, you cannot discriminate against special needs students. You cannot discriminate against students who are racial, ethnic minority. You cannot discriminate against children because of their sexual orientation. We're not going to like to discriminate. So therefore, they want to get rid of everything federal. But of course, we live in a federal system. And if you get rid of the federal department or get rid of federalism, you've gotten rid of our American democracy. And folks don't understand that as well. So like I said earlier, democracy is on the line. We have to educate our kids and educate our kids well. Thank you for the question.
Thank you. Lisa?
Yeah, I think that I don't think it's going away anytime soon. I do think that and really honestly, it's because of the teacher shortage. We are doing our special ed students a disservice. In the sense that we're losing special ed teachers at a far quicker rate than any other content, just because of, we talk about unrealistic expectations for all teachers, but special ed, and especially in the last 5 or 10 years, where they sort of switched the classrooms to what they call multi-category. And so you're putting students with a lot of particularly different needs into one class, and then also not giving the resources to that teacher or class to handle it. And so that to me is where I really see the disservice that we're doing. And so we've got to fix that. We've got to get, we've got to take the workloads off of all teachers, but particularly our special ed teachers. We've got to get the class sizes down to where they're manageable. And we've got to do, the goal of public education is to educate every single student who comes through those doors, regardless of any of their personal traits. And again, that's the focus of public education, is to prepare students for the society that they're going to live in. I see the special ed teachers that I work with on a daily basis do amazing things with their students, and the growth that I see and the love that they share, it's really inspiring. But we've got to take some of that workload off of those teachers to help them be even more effective in the classroom and with their students. And the reality is that the way that we teach today is not the way that I was taught, right? It's not the way. It's a very different educational system, where teachers are expected to really individualize instruction for all of their students. And that becomes very, very difficult in the current circumstances where you have enormous class sizes, you've got such a range of abilities and all of that, because you don't have the workforce that you need for schools, not just teachers, but that school support staff. Those instructional aides are so vital to the special ed classrooms in particular. And often with a substitute shortage, they're the first ones that are pulled out. So that's definitely something that the superintendent of ed can really work on at the working conditions level, but we've also got to address it at the salary level and, all of that, just to get, I say that there's a teacher shortage. There's really not. We have certified teachers in South Carolina. They're just not willing to do the job for, the pay and the working conditions right now. I think if we can relieve some of that, we'll have teachers that are willing to come back to the classroom. Because I've yet to meet a teacher that says, "Oh yeah, I just can't stand the kids." Like, that's not why they're leaving. And so we need to make those working conditions better, particularly for our special ed teachers.
Yeah.
Well, thank you both, Miss Ellis and Dr. Burgess, for visiting us tonight and answering our questions. And we really appreciate it. We had some really thoughtful questions and you had some really thoughtful answers. Yeah, you did a fantastic job, both of you. So thank you. And I want to remind everyone that early voting is open. You can vote at the County Administration Building or at Indian Land High School on weekdays, 8:30 a.m. to 5 p.m. And then, of course, the primary day polls, I believe, are open 7 to 7 on June 14th. So please make sure that you make a plan and you know when you're going to go vote if you have not voted yet. And I'm also going to ask our candidates, please drop your information in the chat. I think, Miss Ellis, you already put your website, but if you'd like to do that again, feel free. And just again, thank you both for taking your time to come and speak with us and answer our questions.
Thank you for having us. And how do we get a link to the recording?
Keith and I will email that out to you.
Okay, very good.
I'm going to write a note right now. Don't forget.
I appreciate everyone. Thank you so very much.
Thank you.
All right. So while you're thinking about your plan to vote, and you can look at the candidates' information in the chat, I want to talk about the minutes from our last month's meeting. I can put that link in the chat as well. All right. And then if you have a correction to the minutes, you can go ahead and speak up. And if not, we can have a motion to approve those minutes.
That was a pretty good meeting, and I think we I don't see anything wrong with the minutes.
All
I'll
right.
move to accept the minutes.
Okay, thank you, Keith. Do we have a second?
I second.
All right, so all those in favor of approving the minutes? Wonderful. Okay, minutes are approved.
Who did the second? Sorry, Katie, who did the second?
I did.
Yes, thank you, Verda.
Berta.
I'm trying to do too many things at one time.
Thank you.
Welcome to my world.
Okay, I also want to remind everybody that there's a lot of really good information in the chat, and you can save the chat. I recommend waiting until the end of the meeting. But if you open up the chat, there are 3 little dots next to the smiley face. And then you can click on Save Chat. So you can save all the candidates' information, the link to the minutes, anything else that you would like. So that said, I'm going to put another thing in the chat. I am going to put the link to our county parties Act Blue so that you can donate. And I really want to encourage everyone to make a recurring donation, even if it's just $5 or $10 a month. The budget committee met at 6 o'clock this evening, right before this meeting. And we are looking at a pretty tight budget. I think it was it within $50 our expenses and our monthly our yearly income right now?
Within $10.
Within $10. Oh my goodness. So like I said, $5 or $10 a month is going to make a big difference for us. So please consider clicking on that link and making a recurring donation. And on a very serious note right now, it is definitely time for us to stand up and go to the polls and vote and overwhelm the polls, but also to strengthen our party, whether it's the county party, state party, candidates. If you have $5 or $10 extra, or even more than that, it's a good place to put it. Like so many candidates have been saying, our democracy is at stake, and we really need to protect our voting rights. On top of protecting our children and protecting ourselves, we have a lot at stake. So again, please, please, please go vote. Make a plan to go vote. Know when you're going to go vote. Get somebody else to go vote. And research the candidates so that you know who you're voting for. And please consider making that recurring donation to our party. And then I have a few announcements. So the Democratic Women's Council is meeting on Thursday, June 16th at 6:30 p.m. and that will be on Zoom. Keith's campaign is having a movie watch party fundraiser on Saturday, June 18th at 1 p.m. Keith, you want to say anything about that?
Certainly, thank you. Yes, we're going to be doing that down here in the town of Lancaster at the Crown Cinema, which has been going through some really great upgrades if no one has been in there for a while. We're going to do the Free State of, let me see. If I get this. Pardon?
Jones.
I keep wanting to say Smith, which is a fascinating story about a county that resisted everything socially and militarily about the Confederacy. And it's a great, very stirring story about what can be here in the South. So we're going to be getting our information out here with links to the reviews and other information. And so looking forward to doing this the week after we get back from our state convention, which is going to be so nice being able to do that in person. Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. Verda, I want to apologize. I got ahead of myself there. Do you want to say anything about the Women's Council meeting?
What you said is good.
Okay.
I do want to just add on to what Keith just said. That is the Juneteenth celebration in Lancaster, and there will be a festival downtown starting at 2 o'clock with vendors and so forth. So it would be good for the Democratic Party to support that in some way.
Yes. Do you know if we could, do you know if the best way for us to support, or should we just show up?
Well, there's an application if Flip with the City of Lancaster, see Lancaster promoter for events is the contact person.
Okay,
So
thank you,
might
Berta.
wanna try to contact him and kind of see. I know there'll be vendors and entertainment, pretty traditional type festival.
Oh,
All right.
I might add the movie will be at 1 o'clock, so this will not take away from, I plan to come to the festival afterward.
Well, I wrote a note and I'm gonna look into that. Thank you, Berta. So 2 o'clock, well, 1 o'clock for Keith on June 18th and 2 o'clock for the festival on June 18th. And then Tuesday, June 21st is our executive committee meeting. That's where we try to take care of all of our business. So if you want to stay in touch with what we're doing and provide your feedback and ideas, you can come then. Our Dim Good Time Social is Wednesday, June 22nd at 6 p.m. and that will be at Town Tavern in Indian Land. And that's just a time for us to get together and get to know one another. And then there's a Treetops Social, which we know have a lot of people from Treetops joining us. That is Thursday, June 23rd at 6 p.m. And there will be more information sent out about that as well. Are there any other announcements?
Katie, this is Jackie Baker. Is Jeannie Wainwright hosting that?
No, it's Janet Austinelli.
Okay, so she'll be back then, okay.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, good. Thank you for that information.
You're welcome. Oh, I didn't put this on here. We are having an event at Andrew Jackson State Park. And sort of like a rally. Hopefully we can get a lot of people and it will be a rally. But we've invited candidates and we're hoping to get some food trucks. Hopefully we're still working on organizing this. Right now the date is July 23rd. That may change because there's also an event in Lancaster that day on July 23rd, a back to school event. But just keep an ear out for an event at Andrew Jackson State Park this summer. All right, does anybody have any questions about voting, about our events, or anything else? Okay, I'll take a motion to adjourn.
Madam Chair, I move that the meeting is adjourned.
All
I
right, thank you,
second.
Verda. Oh,
I second.
I don't know if I heard Gina or if I saw Bonnie first. Karen, I'll let you pick. All right, all those in favor? Okay, our meeting is adjourned. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Have a great evening.
Good
Good
night.
night, everyone. Thank you.
Oh, Keith, I don't think Carrie got my message.
Yes, not. Well, he did go when Dr. Burgess was done. He did start saying, Lisa, like something to the effect, so he
Yeah, I
wasn't
think
cutting her
so.
out, but yeah, it was kind of rude.
I just think it could have been I'd like to hear this answer from Dr. Burgess. This question is for you
First,
or something.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
Mm.
So, well, you know what? That's something I could do ahead of time. The next time we have candidates come through, is just address that etiquette. And also Bonnie messaged me and I realized at first I introduced Dr. Burgess and Lisa, and it should have been Dr. Burgess and Miss Ellis.
Yeah.
So I'm glad Bonnie called me out on that.
Oh, well.
I was just reading their screen names.
Mhm. Well, okay, here's the situation. Severio had problems with the internet to the point where they had to actually get in touch with Comporium.
Poor thing.
Yeah, so this is what I sent to him. Well, this earlier, he was dealing with it calling Comporium about 7:45 And I said, okay, well, we usually run to 8:15 or 8:30. And by a little bit after 8, and you'd said, let's make this the last question and, to take care of the rest of the business, which was great timing, I thought.
Thank you.
And so I sent, let's lock you in for the first Thursday of July.
Perfect. Good. Okay. So I hate that for him.
Yeah.
I know that's frustrating, but it worked out perfectly.
Yeah, well, down here, Comporium bites
Oh,
because they have no competition.
yeah. Well, at least we've invited him to the next one, and he knows we still want to hear from him.
Yep.
And
Oh,
we
definitely. This is going to be very good.
and we had plenty of questions to take our speakers for a long time. So.
Oh yeah, it turned out perfectly on timing. We might have ended up shortchanging them a little bit by the end. But I think all the questions were addressed very well. Like we got some great candidates here.
We do. I was impressed. Yeah. I think I know who I'm leaning towards. But
I already pulled the trigger.
it's a tough decision.
It was. I had to keep going back to their websites and looking at their backgrounds and everything. And as I said, I had a chance to actually directly ask Dr. Burgess about.
What did he say?
What he said is that they kind of just went way off to the right, off the cliff. And his stance on all the important issues are very acceptable to me. I mean, we have several ex-Republicans that contribute a lot to our county party.
I grew up as a Republican.
Yeah.
So yeah, people can grow and change and learn.
So, and I, going over his credentials, holy cow. I mean, I like Lisa a lot and she's doing great things with SC for Ed. But I kind of lean toward his administrative experience. That's a long resume there.
I think I still have some trauma related to administrators.
Yeah. Well, now that's a personal problem.
That is a personal problem. I think they're both highly qualified and I'd be happy with either one of them.
Yeah, we'd be well served with either of them.
Yeah. I don't think we can go wrong here. So that's good.
Okay.
All right. Well, have a good night.
And we'll talk to you tomorrow. I got some
Yeah.
good stuff to report on the campaign.
Awesome.
Okay. Take care.